Gareth Faulkner always believed in simplicity. Life didn't need grandeur or extravagance to be fulfilling, just love, honesty, and hard work. Growing up in the green valleys of Vermont, he dreamed of building a family as sturdy and reliable as the electrical circuits he worked on. A family that would stand firm, no matter what storms came their way. It felt like a dream come true when he married Annalise Harper. She was vibrant, determined, and had a way of making everyone feel like they belonged. Their wedding was small, intimate, and filled with laughter. Gareth remembered the way Annalise had smiled at him as they exchanged vows, her eyes shimmering with promises of forever. Back then, forever seemed tangible, something they could hold on to tightly. Their son, Finn, was the light of Gareth's life. The boy had Annalise's inquisitive nature and Gareth's quiet determination. At just 8, Finn was a bundle of energy, his imagination endless. Whether building forts in the woods behind their modest home or helping Gareth with small projects in the garage, Finn was always by his side, chatting endlessly about his dreams of becoming an inventor. For a while, life felt perfect. Gareth would wake up early, kiss Annalise goodbye, and head off to his job wiring homes and fixing power lines. In the evenings, he'd return home to the warm smells of Annalise's cooking and Finn's boisterous greeting. They'd eat dinner together, talking about their days, their plans for the future, a bigger house, maybe a dog for Finn to play with. But as time wore on, the cracks began to show. At first it was subtle. Annalise started coming home later than usual, citing work meetings or property showings that ran long. Gareth didn't think much of it. She was passionate about her job as a real estate agent, and he admired that about her. But then there were the moments when she seemed distant, physically present, but her mind elsewhere. She stopped asking about his day. The playful touches and warm smiles that had once defined their relationship grew infrequent. Gareth brushed it off as stress. "She's just tired," he told himself. "The market's been crazy lately." Yet deep down, a quiet unease began to settle in his chest. One evening, as Finn played with his toys on the living room floor, Gareth watched Annalise from across the table. She was scrolling through her phone, a slight smile playing on her lips. "Something funny?" he asked, hoping to spark a conversation. She looked up, startled, and quickly set the phone down. "Just a meme," she said, her tone clipped. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed her guardedness. Over the next few weeks, Gareth found himself second-guessing everything. Her rushed goodbyes in the morning, the unexplained phone calls, the way she seemed more preoccupied than ever. The final straw came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Gareth had just returned from a supply run when he saw Annalise in the backyard. Her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice was low, urgent. She ended the call abruptly when she noticed him watching. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "A client," she replied quickly, brushing past him into the house. But something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt maybe, sent a chill down his spine. That night, as Gareth lay awake next to her, the doubts he'd tried so hard to ignore began to whisper louder. Was it stress? Or was there something else, something he didn't want to name? He turned to look at Annalise, her face peaceful in sleep. He wanted to believe that the woman lying beside him was the same person who had once promised him forever. But for the first time, doubt clouded that belief, and with it came a sense of foreboding that he couldn't shake. The first time Gareth noticed the shift, it was subtle. Annalise had always been meticulous, but now she seemed preoccupied, her focus drifting like a radio signal on the wrong frequency. It began with small things, missed conversations, a hesitance in her laughter, the way her hand would slip from his a second too soon. He told himself it was stress, a busy season in real estate. But deep down, a voice whispered something he wasn't ready to hear. It was a Saturday evening when he first felt the sting of distance. Finn was on the floor building towers out of mismatched Lego pieces, his face scrunched in concentration. Gareth leaned back on the couch, nursing a beer, content to simply watch. Annalise had been out all afternoon for a showing, and when she walked through the door, the air shifted. Her smile was forced, her tone overly cheerful. "Hey, everyone!" she called, ruffling Finn's hair. "Did it go well?" Gareth asked, setting his bottle on the coffee table. She blinked as though she hadn't heard him. "Oh, the showing? Yeah, sure, they're considering it." Her answer felt too vague, but Gareth didn't press. Instead, he let the moment pass, unwilling to turn a crack into a canyon. That night, as they lay in bed, Gareth turned to her, hoping for some semblance of the woman who once confided everything to him. "How are you holding up? You seem distracted lately." Annalise paused, her fingers stilling on the edge of the quilt. "It's just work," she said softly, her back turned. "The market's been unpredictable, and I'm trying to keep up." He wanted to believe her. He really did. But her words felt like answers rehearsed in front of a mirror. A week later, Gareth found himself standing in the kitchen, scrubbing grease off his hands after another long day of wiring an old farmhouse. Finn was at the table, drawing blueprints for a robot that can clean your room. Gareth grinned at his son's enthusiasm when the front door opened. Annalise walked in, her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't even glance in their direction. No, I'll handle it. Just let me check my schedule first," she said, her voice low and hurried. Without breaking stride, she walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Finn looked up, confused. "Why didn't Mom say hi?" Gareth forced a smile. "She's probably busy, buddy, don't worry about it." But he did worry, more than he wanted to admit. Later that night, while Finn was asleep and the house was quiet, Gareth sat at the kitchen table. Annalise was on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. "Want some tea?" he asked, trying to bridge the gap. She barely glanced up. "Oh, sure, thanks." He watched her as he boiled the water, the light from the screen casting shadows on her face. She looked tired, yes, but there was something else, something guarded. He placed the mug in front of her, hoping the gesture might pull her back to him. "Thanks," she murmured, taking a sip before returning to her work. That night, Gareth lay awake, his mind circling the same thoughts. He replayed her clipped responses, the hurried phone calls, the way she seemed to exist just slightly out of reach. Was he imagining things? Or was there something real, something dangerous, lurking beneath the surface? The turning point came 2 days later. Gareth came home early from a canceled job and found Annalise in the backyard. She was on the phone again, her tone soft and deliberate in a way that sent a chill through him. "I know, but it's complicated," she said, pacing near the fence. "He doesn't suspect anything." Gareth froze. The words hit like a blow to the chest, knocking the air out of him. He stepped closer, the sound of the gravel beneath his boots causing her to whirl around. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, his voice calm but his heart pounding. "A client," she said quickly, tucking her phone into her pocket. "Just a client." Her answer was too quick, too neat. And for the first time, Gareth felt the foundations of his perfect family begin to crumble. Gareth Faulkner didn't want to believe it. Not at first. He tried to shake off the unease, chalking it up to his own insecurities. But the signs were too loud to ignore. Each unanswered question, every suspicious glance, every guarded moment screamed a truth he didn't want to face. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. Gareth had taken the day off, determined to spend it with Finn. They built a treehouse out back, Finn hammering nails with a focus that reminded Gareth of himself at that age. For a few hours, Gareth felt peace, his worries melting in the glow of his son's laughter. But peace is fleeting. As the sun dipped below the trees, Annalise came home. Her makeup was flawless, her clothes pristine, too polished for a casual workday. "How was your day?" Gareth asked, forcing a smile. Annalise hesitated for a moment before walking past him. "Busy," she muttered, her tone dismissive. That night, Gareth decided to confront her. As she stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables, he leaned against the counter, watching her closely. "Annalise," he began, his voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." She didn't look up. "About what?" "About us, about what's going on with you." She froze, the knife poised midair. "What do you mean?" "You're different," he said, taking a step closer. "You've been distant, secretive, and earlier today I saw a text pop up on your phone from someone named Victor. Who is he?" Her hands tightened around the knife handle. "He's a client." Gareth's chest tightened. Then why did the message say, "I can't wait to see you again"? The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Annalise's face flushed, her lips parting as though she wanted to deny it, but no words came. Instead, she turned away, her shoulders stiff. "I don't have to explain myself to you." The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. "You do," Gareth replied, his voice trembling. "Because we made vows, Annalise. We built a life together, and now I feel like I'm the only one holding on to it." She turned to him then, her eyes blazing with something between anger and guilt. "I didn't plan for this to happen, Gareth. I didn't mean for things to get so complicated." "Complicated?" he repeated, his voice breaking. "You're cheating on me and you call it complicated?" Tears welled in her eyes, but Gareth felt no sympathy. Not now. Not when everything he'd worked so hard to build was crumbling before him. "I thought I could fix it," she whispered. "I thought if I just kept going, if I didn't say anything, we could, I don't know, move past it." Gareth laughed bitterly. "Move past it? You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and you think we can just pretend it didn't happen?" Finn's footsteps echoed down the hallway, his voice breaking the tension. "Mom? Dad? What's wrong?" Gareth turned, his heart sinking as he saw his son's worried face. "Nothing, buddy," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Go back to bed." But Finn didn't move. His wide eyes darted between his parents, picking up on the unspoken words hanging in the air. "Are you fighting?" "No, sweetheart," Annalise said, her voice shaking. "Everything's fine." Finn lingered for a moment longer before retreating to his room. When Gareth turned back to Annalise, his voice dropped to a whisper. "We'll finish this conversation later." She nodded, wiping at her eyes, but Gareth knew the damage was done. He couldn't unsee the betrayal etched into her face, couldn't unhear the weight of her confession. That night, Gareth lay awake, the bed feeling emptier than it ever had before. His thoughts swirled, each one darker than the last. Annalise's betrayal wasn't just a crack in their marriage. It was an earthquake, shaking the very foundation of the life they'd built. And Gareth knew nothing would ever be the same again. The days following Annalise's confession were a blur for Gareth. He moved through life like a man wading through deep water, each step heavier than the last. At work, his mind wandered. At home, the silence was suffocating. And in the midst of it all, the one thing that kept him grounded was Finn. "Dad, can we play catch after dinner?" Finn asked one evening, his eyes bright with hope. Gareth looked at him, forcing a smile despite the ache in his chest. "Of course, buddy. I'll grab the gloves." In moments like these, Gareth found himself clinging to the simple joys. Finn was his anchor, the one reason he kept moving forward, but even that connection was under threat. Annalise had started staying out later, her excuses growing thinner by the day. Gareth knew what was coming. He could feel it like a storm on the horizon. The storm broke on a cold, gray afternoon. Gareth was fixing a broken light fixture in the kitchen when Annalise walked in, her face pale but determined. "We need to talk," she said. He set down his tools, bracing himself. "What now?" "I'm leaving," she said, her voice trembling. "Victor and we've decided to move in together." For a moment, Gareth couldn't speak. The words hit him like a blow, knocking the air out of his lungs. "You're... what?" "I'm taking Finn with me," she continued, avoiding his eyes. "It's for the best." "No," Gareth said firmly, his voice rising. "You're not taking him." "You don't have a choice," she shot back. "The court will side with me. I've already spoken to a lawyer." Her words were like a knife to the heart. The thought of losing Finn, of waking up every morning to an empty house, of not hearing his son's laughter, was unbearable. "You think I'll just let that happen?" he said, his voice shaking with anger. "You think I'll let you rip my family apart and walk away like it's nothing?" "I don't want to fight," Annalise said, her tone softening. "But this is what's best for everyone." "Best for who? For you? For Victor?" Gareth clenched his fists, his voice breaking. "What about Finn? What about me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked out, leaving Gareth standing there, his world crumbling around him. That night, Gareth sat alone in the living room, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He couldn't lose Finn. He wouldn't. But how could he fight against the odds? Annalise had a head start, a lawyer, a plan. All he had was the truth and a determination to protect his son. The next morning, Gareth made a decision. He called an attorney, explaining everything, the affair, Annalise's plans, his fears for Finn. "You'll need evidence," the attorney said. "Anything that shows you're the more stable parent." Gareth nodded, his resolve hardening. He started documenting everything, every late night Annalise spent away, every time Finn mentioned Victor's name with unease. He saved texts, recorded conversations, anything that might help his case. But it wasn't just about winning in court. Gareth also needed to be there for Finn, to shield him from the chaos threatening to consume their lives. He spent every moment he could with his son, playing catch in the yard, helping with homework, and tucking him in at night. "I love you, buddy," he whispered one evening as Finn drifted off to sleep. "I love you too, Dad," Finn murmured, his voice sleepy but sincere. In those quiet moments, Gareth found strength. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for Finn, for their family. And no matter how daunting the odds seemed, he wasn't going to give up. The confrontation Gareth had dreaded finally arrived on a chilly Friday evening. He was in the garage, hands deep in the guts of an old generator, when his phone buzzed on the workbench. Wiping his hands on a rag, he picked it up to see a text from Finn. "Mom and Victor are fighting again. I'm scared." His chest tightened, anger and fear surging in equal measure. Without hesitation, Gareth grabbed his keys and was out the door. The drive to Annalise's new house felt both too long and too short. As he pulled into the driveway, he could hear raised voices spilling out from inside. The front door was ajar. Gareth stepped inside, his heart pounding. Finn stood frozen at the base of the stairs, clutching a stuffed bear. Annalise and Victor were in the living room, their argument escalating. "Mom!" Finn cried, breaking the tension. Annalise turned, her face pale and drawn. Victor looked over his shoulder, his expression darkening when he saw Gareth. "What the hell are you doing here?" Victor barked, his fists clenched. "I'm here for my son," Gareth replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Finn, come with me." "Gareth, wait," Annalise began, but Victor cut her off. "You don't get to just barge in here like some knight in shining armor," Victor sneered. "This is my house." "Then act like a man and stop yelling in front of a child," Gareth shot back, his tone sharp as steel. Victor took a step forward, but Gareth didn't flinch. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Victor spat. "You're nothing but a washed-up electrician." "And you're a liar who preys on vulnerable women," Gareth retorted. His voice was calm, but his fists were clenched at his sides. "Stay away from my son." Finn whimpered and Annalise moved to him, pulling him into her arms. Her hands were trembling. "Victor, that's enough," she said quietly. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Don't tell me what to do, Annalise." Before Gareth could respond, Victor lunged toward him. Years of physical work had left Gareth strong and quick, and he sidestepped, shoving Victor backward. The man stumbled, nearly losing his balance. "Call the police," Gareth said to Annalise, his voice low but commanding. "Now!" For a moment Annalise hesitated, but when Victor lunged again, she grabbed her phone. "I'm done," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm calling." Victor froze, his eyes darting between Gareth and Annalise. "You're making a mistake," he hissed before storming out the door. The silence that followed was deafening. Finn clung to Annalise, his small frame trembling. Gareth knelt in front of his son, his voice softening. "It's okay, buddy, you're safe now." Finn nodded, but tears streamed down his face. Gareth pulled him into a tight hug, his own emotions threatening to spill over. "I'm so sorry," Annalise said, her voice barely audible. Gareth looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "This isn't about us," he said after a moment. "It's about him, and he deserves better than this." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "You're right." That night, Gareth took Finn home with him, leaving Annalise to sort through the mess she had let into their lives. As he tucked his son into bed, Finn whispered, "Are you staying with me forever, Dad?" "Always, buddy," Gareth said, his voice firm. "Always." But even as he reassured his son, Gareth knew the battle was far from over. Victor might be gone for now, but the scars he left behind were deep, and Annalise's choices had built walls that might never fully come down. Gareth Faulkner didn't think he could be shocked anymore. Life had already tested him in ways he hadn't imagined, Annalise's betrayal, the battle for Finn, the confrontation with Victor. Yet, as he stood in the hospital hallway, staring through the glass at the tiny newborn in the bassinet, he felt his world tilt again. The baby, Rosalie, had a full head of vibrant red hair, not auburn, not strawberry blonde, but unmistakably red, just like Gareth's own when he was a boy. His breath caught, and for a moment the bustling noise of the hospital faded to silence. The timing didn't add up. Annalise had insisted Victor was the father, but as Gareth stared at Rosalie, doubt crept into the edges of his mind. He turned abruptly, his boots clicking on the polished floor as he approached the nurse's station. "Excuse me," he said, his voice strained. "Can I see Annalise Harper?" The nurse glanced up from her clipboard. "Are you family?" Gareth hesitated. "I'm her ex-husband." The nurse frowned, but before she could answer, Annalise's voice came from behind him. "Gareth?" He turned to find her standing in the doorway of her room, her face pale and drawn. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy in the air. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gareth gestured toward the nursery. "I came to see Rosalie." Annalise's eyes flicked toward the window, then back to him. "You didn't have to come, didn't I?" His voice hardened. "She's got my hair, Annalise. Don't tell me that's a coincidence." Her lips parted as though to argue, but no words came. Instead, she sank into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Try the truth," Gareth said, his tone sharper than he intended. "Is she mine?" I don't know," Annalise admitted, her voice cracking. "I thought she was Victor's, I really did." Rage and disbelief churned in Gareth's chest. "You thought? You didn't even consider the possibility that she might be mine? You just let him play house while you lied to me?" Tears spilled down Annalise's cheeks, but Gareth couldn't bring himself to feel pity. Not now. "I didn't want to drag you into it," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't think it would change anything." "You didn't think I deserved to know?" His voice rose, drawing a glance from a passing nurse. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "I want a DNA test. Today." Annalise nodded, her shoulders slumping. "Okay." The process was quicker than Gareth expected, but the waiting afterward felt endless. He sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at his untouched coffee, his mind racing. What if she was his? What would that mean? For him, for Finn, for Rosalie, and if she wasn't, what then? Finally, the nurse returned with a sealed envelope. Gareth's hands shook as he opened it. The words were clinical, emotionless. Positive match. Rosalie was his daughter. For a moment, Gareth couldn't breathe. The world around him seemed to blur, the noise of the cafeteria fading into the background. Then a single thought pierced through the fog. He had a daughter. A tiny, beautiful, innocent daughter who had been kept from him, who had no idea how much she was already loved. He stood abruptly, heading back to Annalise's room. When she saw him, her expression was unreadable. "Well?" she asked softly. "She's mine," Gareth said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "You should have told me." "I'm sorry," Annalise whispered, tears streaming down her face. But Gareth shook his head. "Sorry isn't enough," he said. "This isn't just about you, Annalise. It's about Rosalie, and I won't let her grow up not knowing her father." Gareth Faulkner sat in his living room, the soft hum of the ceiling fan the only sound breaking the silence. Finn was asleep upstairs, his breathing steady and calm after Gareth had tucked him in with promises of pancakes for breakfast. But Gareth's own thoughts were anything but calm. His mind raced, caught between the weight of the past and the fragile hopes of the future. Rosalie, his daughter. The word still felt foreign, yet deeply familiar, as if it had always been a part of him, waiting to surface. He glanced at the photo on the mantel, one of Finn when he was a baby, his face a mirror of the curious, wide-eyed innocence Gareth had seen in Rosalie's tiny features. How could he have missed so much already? How could Annalise have denied him the chance to hold his daughter from the very beginning? The knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Annalise standing there, her face shadowed by the porch light. She was holding Rosalie, who was bundled in a soft pink blanket, her tiny hands peeking out. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Can we come in?" Annalise asked hesitantly. Gareth stepped aside, his gaze fixed on Rosalie. He didn't speak until Annalise handed her to him. Holding his daughter for the first time felt surreal, her warmth against his chest, the faint scent of baby lotion filling the air. She let out a small, sleepy sigh, and Gareth felt something inside him shift. "I wanted you to have this time with her," Annalise said softly, breaking the moment. "I know. I've made mistakes." "That's putting it lightly," Gareth replied, his voice sharp. He didn't look up, his attention still on Rosalie. "You kept her from me, Annalise. That's not something I can just forget." "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was doing what was best. I was wrong, Gareth. I see that now." Her words hung in the air, but Gareth wasn't ready to address them. "Finn doesn't know yet," he said instead. "I haven't told him about Rosalie." Annalise nodded. "He deserves to know, but I think he'll need time to understand." "Time," Gareth repeated, finally looking at her. "That's what we've both wasted, isn't it?" She didn't reply. Instead, she sank into the armchair, her eyes fixed on Rosalie. "I want us to work together," she said after a long pause. "For the kids." Gareth nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "We can do that, but don't mistake this for forgiveness." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Annalise said quietly. "Just a chance to make things right." The conversation ended there, each of them lost in their own thoughts. When Rosalie stirred in his arms, Gareth rocked her gently, his mind wandering to Finn. How would his son react to this sudden change? Would he feel replaced, or would he embrace the role of big brother? The next morning, Gareth prepared Finn's favorite breakfast, his heart heavy with anticipation. As they sat at the table, he cleared his throat. "Finn, there's something I need to tell you." Finn looked up, a piece of syrup-covered pancake halfway to his mouth. "What is it?" "You have a little sister," Gareth said, his voice steady but soft. "Her name is Rosalie." Finn's eyes widened. "A sister? Where is she?" "She's here," Gareth said, motioning toward the living room where Annalise was sitting with Rosalie. "Would you like to meet her?" Finn nodded eagerly, his face lighting up with curiosity. As Gareth led him into the room, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. This was their chance to start over, not as the family they once were, but as something new, something better. Gareth Faulkner stared at the papers spread across the kitchen table, their stark legal language cutting through the quiet of the house. The custody agreement. It felt like a foreign object in his hands, heavier than it should have been, yet it seemed impossible to let go. Finn's laughter echoed faintly from the living room, a cruel reminder of what was at stake. Annalise's ultimatum still rang in his ears. "If you don't give me another chance, Gareth, I'll fight for full custody of both Finn and Rosalie." Her words had struck like a lightning bolt, leaving him stunned and breathless. He had known Annalise was desperate, but this was a new low. The woman he once loved now stood before him as a stranger, wielding their children like weapons in a battle he didn't want to fight. "Dad?" Finn's voice pulled Gareth from his thoughts. The boy stood in the doorway, clutching his favorite stuffed bear. "What's wrong?" Gareth forced a smile, tucking the papers into a folder. "Nothing, buddy, just work stuff." Finn tilted his head, his expression skeptical but trusting. "Are we still going to the park tomorrow?" "Of course," Gareth said, ruffling his son's hair. "Go finish your movie." As Finn disappeared back into the living room, Gareth sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. How could he make this choice? He couldn't imagine a life without his kids, but the idea of reconciling with Annalise made his stomach churn. The betrayal, the lies, it was a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. The next day, Gareth found himself sitting across from his lawyer, a man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. "What are my options?" Gareth asked, his voice hoarse. The lawyer sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You could fight her in court, but it'll be a long, messy process. And frankly, the courts tend to favor mothers in custody cases, especially with young children like Rosalie." "So you're saying I'll lose?" "I'm saying it'll be an uphill battle," the lawyer clarified, "unless you can prove she's unfit." Gareth nodded, his chest tightening. And if I don't fight, if I agree to what she wants? The lawyer's expression softened. Then you maintain access to your kids, but it comes at a cost. Only you can decide if that cost is worth it. That night, Gareth lay awake, the lawyer's words replaying in his mind. He thought of Finn, who still crawled into bed with him after nightmares. He thought of Rosalie, who wrapped her tiny hand around his finger as if she never wanted to let go. Could he risk losing them? Could he trust Annalise to keep her word? In the morning, Gareth called Annalise. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady. They met at a quiet coffee shop, the air between them heavy with unspoken tension. "Have you made a decision?" Annalise asked, her hands gripping her mug. Gareth looked at her, his jaw clenched. "I'll agree to your terms," he said slowly, "but only under one condition." "What's that?" "Joint custody," Gareth said firmly. "You won't shut me out of their lives, and if you try, I'll fight you with everything I've got." Annalise stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "Okay," she said softly. "I just want us to find some kind of peace for the kids." "For the kids?" Gareth echoed, though his heart felt anything but peaceful. As he left the coffee shop, Gareth couldn't shake the weight of his decision. It wasn't the victory he'd hoped for, but it was a step forward, a fragile truce in a battle that had already taken too much. The night was unusually quiet in Gareth Faulkner's home. Finn had gone to bed early, tired from soccer practice, and Rosalie slept soundly in her crib, her soft breaths filling the small nursery. Gareth sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the phone in his hands, the words of Annalise's ultimatum still echoing in his mind. It wasn't just the legal agreement that weighed on him. It was the realization that his life, as he knew it, had been spiraling while he focused on holding on to pieces of a broken past. He had been so consumed by the fight for his children that he hadn't taken a moment to reflect on what kind of father, or man, he truly wanted to be. The wake-up call came with a text from Leona. "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" Leona Driscoll had been a quiet constant in Gareth's life over the past few months, her gentle humor and understanding a balm to his frayed nerves. Yet he had kept her at arm's length, afraid of inviting more complexity into an already tangled web. Gareth typed a quick response. "I've been caught up in things. Want to meet for coffee tomorrow?" The reply came almost instantly. "Of course, I'll bring the sarcasm, you bring the coffee." The next morning, Gareth found himself sitting across from Leona at a small cafe, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the sound of soft chatter. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," she said, her tone light but her gaze piercing. Gareth sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's been a lot." "You're fighting a battle, Gareth," Leona said, her voice softening. "But are you fighting the right one?" Her words hit like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to respond but found he didn't have an answer. Leona leaned forward, her hands wrapping around her cup. "You're an amazing dad, Gareth. Anyone can see that. But you're also more than just a father. You deserve to live, to be happy. I don't even know what happiness looks like anymore," Gareth admitted, his voice barely audible. "Start small," Leona said with a smile. "What makes you feel alive? What makes you laugh? Do that, and let the rest fall into place." As Gareth drove home, her words echoed in his mind. He thought of Finn's laughter, Rosalie's tiny hand gripping his finger, the way Leona's smile made his chest feel lighter. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop surviving and start living. Later that day, while playing soccer with Finn in the backyard, Gareth felt something shift. It was in the way Finn's laughter filled the air, unburdened and free. In the way Rosalie giggled when Gareth scooped her up, holding her high above his head. For the first time in a long while, Gareth wasn't thinking about court battles or past betrayals. He was just there, in the moment, with his children. That night, as Gareth tucked Finn into bed, his son looked up at him with wide, sleepy eyes. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy?" "Are we going to be okay?" Gareth smiled, smoothing Finn's hair. "We're going to be better than okay." For the first time in months, Gareth believed it. As he sat by the window, watching the stars blink against the dark sky, Gareth picked up his phone. He sent a simple text to Leona. "Thank you. For everything." Her reply came moments later. "Always here for you." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Gareth allowed himself to hope. The courthouse felt cold, sterile, and far from the warmth of home. Gareth Faulkner sat at the wooden table, his hands clasped tightly as his lawyer whispered last-minute reassurances. Across the room, Annalise sat with her attorney, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. It had come to this, a final battle over the future of their children. Finn and Rosalie were with Gareth's parents, spared from the tension unfolding in this courtroom. Gareth could only hope they'd never have to understand the depths of this fight. The arguments, the strategies, the painful bearing of truths. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Gareth's heart pounded as the session began. Annalise's lawyer spoke first, painting her as a loving mother who had made mistakes but was committed to giving her children the best life possible. Gareth felt his jaw tighten as the lawyer referenced Annalise's efforts to reconcile and her willingness to work together for the sake of the kids. When it was his lawyer's turn, the tone shifted. "Your Honor," she began, "Mr. Faulkner has demonstrated time and again that he is a devoted father who prioritizes the well-being of his children. While Miss Harper's intentions may be genuine, her past decisions, including withholding information about Rosalie's paternity and introducing an unstable partner into the children's lives, raise valid concerns about her judgment." Gareth watched Annalise flinch slightly, her eyes darting to her lap. He didn't take any satisfaction in her discomfort. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about ensuring Finn and Rosalie had stability, safety, and love. The hearing continued, both sides presenting evidence and testimonies. Gareth spoke honestly about his experiences, the sleepless nights worrying about Finn, the shock of discovering Rosalie's existence, and the joy of building a relationship with both children. He tried to remain composed, but his voice cracked when he described the fear of losing them. "Finn and Rosalie are everything to me," he said, his hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. "I'll do whatever it takes to be there for them. They deserve parents who put their needs above all else." When Annalise took the stand, Gareth listened intently. She admitted her mistakes, her voice breaking as she spoke of the guilt she carried. "I know I've let them down," she said, "but I'm trying to do better. I want to do better." The judge's expression remained impassive as both lawyers made their closing arguments. Gareth's heart raced as the room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Finally, the judge spoke. "In cases like this, the court must prioritize the best interests of the children. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimonies, I have reached a decision." Gareth held his breath, his fists clenched under the table. "Custody will be shared jointly. Finn and Rosalie will split their time between both parents, with primary residence awarded to Mr. Faulkner." A wave of relief washed over Gareth, and he exhaled shakily. He glanced at Annalise, who nodded faintly, her expression a mixture of resignation and acceptance. As the courtroom emptied, Annalise approached Gareth. "I know this isn't what you wanted," she said softly, "but I think it's what's best, for them." Gareth looked at her, his gaze steady. "Let's make it work," he said simply. "For Finn and Rosalie." Later that evening, Gareth returned home to find Finn waiting by the door. "Did you win, Dad?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with hope. Gareth knelt down, pulling Finn into a tight hug. "It's not about winning, buddy," he said. "It's about us being a family." And as he held his son close, Gareth realized that this was the beginning of something new, a chance to build a future not defined by the past, but by the love and resilience that had carried them through. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden beams across the living room. Gareth Faulkner sat on the couch, a steaming cup of coffee cradled in his hands. The house was unusually quiet. Finn was still asleep, and Rosalie had just drifted off for her morning nap. For the first time in months, Gareth felt a sense of calm, a fragile peace settling over him. He glanced at the framed photos on the mantel. One of Finn, grinning ear to ear, holding a soccer ball. Another of Rosalie, her tiny fingers wrapped around Gareth's thumb. These moments, these anchors, had carried him through the storm. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence. It was a message from Leona. "Up for a walk later? Weather's perfect." Gareth smiled. Leona had been a steady presence in his life, a source of quiet strength when everything else felt chaotic. Their bond had grown slowly, rooted in mutual understanding and a shared appreciation for life's small joys. "Sounds great. Meet you at the park at 2?" he typed back. Finn's footsteps padded down the stairs, his hair tousled from sleep. "Morning, Dad," he mumbled, climbing onto the couch and leaning into Gareth's side. "Morning, buddy. Want pancakes?" Finn grinned. "Always." As Gareth stood to make breakfast, he marveled at how far they'd come. The custody battle had been grueling, but it had also clarified what truly mattered: his children's happiness, their sense of security, and the love that bound them as a family. Annalise had been surprisingly cooperative since the court's decision, working with Gareth to create a schedule that prioritized the kids' needs. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Later that afternoon, Gareth and Finn strolled through the park to meet Leona. Rosalie was snug in her stroller, her tiny hand gripping a plush rabbit. Leona waved from a bench, her smile brightening the overcast day. As they approached, she stood, holding out her arms to Finn. "Hey, superstar! How's soccer?" Finn beamed, launching into a detailed account of his last game. Gareth watched, his heart swelling with gratitude. Leona had a way of making Finn feel seen, valued, a gift he didn't take for granted. As they walked along the tree-lined path, Leona glanced at Gareth. "You look lighter today," she said softly. He nodded, his gaze drifting to Finn, who was racing ahead to chase a squirrel. "I feel lighter," he admitted. "It's been a long road, but I think we're finally finding our way." Leona reached out, her fingers brushing his. "You deserve this, Gareth. You all do." They continued walking in companionable silence, the weight of the past giving way to the promise of something new. Gareth couldn't help but think of all the moments that had brought him here. The heartbreak, the fights, the sleepless nights. Each one had shaped him, strengthened him, and led him to this moment. When they reached the pond, Finn turned and ran back toward them, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad, can we feed the ducks?" Gareth laughed. "Of course, let's see what we've got." Leona pulled a bag of breadcrumbs from her tote, handing it to Finn. "Always prepared," she said with a wink. As Finn tossed crumbs into the water, Gareth turned to Leona. "Thank you for sticking around, for believing in us." She smiled, her eyes warm. "You make it easy." Gareth took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a daunting unknown. It felt like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with new memories, new joys. Rosalie stirred in her stroller, letting out a soft coo. Gareth leaned down, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "We're going to be okay," he whispered, and for the first time he truly believed it. What do you think of Gareth's journey and the choices he made for his family? From which region are you watching this video? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And remember to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen. See you in the next video.